2016 is coming to a close. Man, it feels like just a second ago I was making my first video of the year where I revisited the Floyd Mayweather-Manny Pacquiao debacle that I told everybody at the time was going to negatively affect the sport. And it feels like it did in 2016. I thought about all the promise we had this year of fights that could have been made that just quite didn't happen. And the can just kept getting kicked down the road into 2017. I do think that there is kind of this general malaise and this kind of fog, this hangover from the Mayweather-Pacquiao thing that affected 2016. But it was also budget cuts. It was also fighters acting more like businessmen than fighters. There was a lot of things at play here. Some of the polarization between the promoters and the networks, all of it. But all in all, there was plenty of good in 2016. And I wanted to give my year-end awards here. And I wanted to set it up like a fight. So we're going to do 12 rounds. And each round will have a different award. And then we'll talk a little bit afterwards about some extras. And see what's coming up in 2017. So let's get started with round one of my year-end awards. This is Montero's 2016 year-end boxing awards. Round one, Prospect of the Year. I think that we have a lot of Eastern European talent. The Slavic invasion is definitely here, man. Alexander Grovstik, 175 pounds, had a win over Isaac Chilemba this year. He's now 12-0, 10 knockouts. He's definitely one of the top prospects in boxing. Sergey Derevyanchenko, 160-pound fighter, 9-0 with 7 knockouts. He's absolutely one of the best. But the guy that I think right now is the best pure prospect in the sport, for my money, is Jarrett Hurd at 154 pounds. This guy is 19-0, 13 knockouts, huge for that weight class, 6'1", 76-inch reach. No doubt he's going to settle in as a middleweight. And I think that he fights in one of the best divisions in boxing right now at 154 pounds, and several of those guys are going to be moving to middleweight in the coming years. I think Hurd will end up there too. I love that he's enrolled in VADA testing. He's only 26 years old. He's a fighter out of Maryland. He is managed by Al Heyman, and that does concern me because Al Heyman doesn't build prospects very well. But right now, man, this guy's been on TV a couple times. He's had some very good performances. He's just a good, solid-looking prospect. Jarrett Hurd. He's my prospect of the year. A lot of good trainers, a lot of new kids on the block having some success. I'm going to go with Manny Robles, who trains Jesse Magdaleno, who won a 122-pound WBO title off Nonito Donaire in a mild upset. Donaire was favored to win that fight. He also trains Oscar Valdez, who has the WBO title at 126 pounds. He also trains Jason Quigley, who had a great knockout win on the undercard of the Hopkins-Smith card to close out a strong 2016 for him. He's a good-looking middleweight prospect. And he also trains the new Irish signee by Top Rank, Michael Conlon, who's going to make his pro debut the Friday before Golovkin-Jacobs in New York during St. Patrick's Day parade. So that's going to be real good. But Manny Robles runs the Rock Gym in Los Angeles, and he's got a good stable of fighters there right now, man. Some of them have taken L's. Vyacheslav Shabransky just lost in pretty dominant fashion. So not all of his guys are kicking ass, but most of them are kicking ass and taking names. And that's a growing stable of young, up-and-coming fighters, and I like to see that. I think some of these trainers have some success, and then they start training old veterans who are trying to reinvent themselves, and it almost becomes kind of a Hollywood type of gym, if you know what I mean. Manny Robles, his gym right now is old school. It's young guys coming up, and there's many more prospects over the next couple of years that you're going to see winning titles training out of that gym. He's my 2016 Trainer of the Year. I think it's clear. You have to go with Showtime. I think Showtime beat up HBO this year in terms of boxing, non-pay-per-view boxing. Now, I know Showtime, there is a gray area there because they do some of the PBC cards that are technically supposed to be on regular TV, but they've had CBS on Showtime and that kind of stuff. I think those cards, I consider them part of the Showtime stable. And if you just look at month to month, consistently throughout the year, I think that Showtime has done a better job for their subscribers, especially when you count Showbox and all those series where they show their prospects compared to HBO. The best fights on HBO this year were on pay-per-view, and a lot of the HBO fighters, HBO has the much better fighters than Showtime, but a lot of those guys were in mismatches this year. And then you look at early 2017, Showtime already has a great lineup. They're already beating out HBO. So I think that Peter Nelson and guys at HBO have to play catch up and have to get some fights done in 2017. Showtime clearly did better in 2016. I think this one is unanimous as well. It's Eddie Hearn. They are doing big things over there with Anthony Joshua. And it's not just AJ, but obviously they are building something big over there. I just like the way Eddie Hearn goes about his business and announces fights. And, I've seen him at so many cards here in Los Angeles and Las Vegas that he doesn't have to be at. But he's literally at the cards here talking to people, negotiating, setting things up, and checking out fighters, checking out prospects. He is very, very good at his job. And you talk about Anthony Joshua, the way that, when he blew out Eric Molina, Vladimir Klitschko was right there ringside. He jumped right up in the ring and they announced the fight right then and there. That was more than 4 months out. So now they have more than 4 months to promote that fight between Joshua and Klitschko on April 29th. That is the way you do big things. And they're putting that fight on at Wembley, which I believe can fit 90,000 fans. So they are really, really doing big things. And one of the things I like about Eddie Hearn's cards too is they're stacked. Are they stacked sometimes with a lot of what I call regional fights that aren't really big on the global scale? Sure, but that's smart. He'll put fights, he'll put guys like George Groves and Martin Murray and those kind of guys that really aren't on the elite level world stage or anything. But over there in the UK, if that's your third, fourth, fifth fight down on your bout sheet, that's a big deal for those guys over there because those guys are names still over there. He stacks his cards. He just signed Luis Ortiz, who you got to figure at some point is going to be in there against Anthony Joshua. He's been keeping Ortiz busy on undercards. He signed a deal with Joshua to fight on Showtime. So now he's got Joshua fighting on American television. He's building up that brand. He's doing it the way it's supposed to be done, and I wish more American promoters would take a look at the way this guy is conducting business because he's doing it right. As with every year, 2016 had tons of upsets, and there are several ways you could go with this one. There are some upsets, like contenders for this category, that I'll mention in other parts of this video, so I won't put them in this category because I don't want to repeat any fights or fighters in all of my rounds. But for me, I had to go with Julius Indongo, his KO win over Edward Troyanovsky. This guy came out of absolutely nowhere, had fought nothing but cans. He's from Namibia in South Africa, was a 2008 Olympian for that country, actually in the China Olympics. He lost in the first round. He had only fought in Namibia. He went pro at the advanced age of 26, and it took him till 33 years old to get this opportunity when he went over to Russia in the Lion's Den and fought Troyanovsky. Destroyed him with that big knockout, put him right in his butt. Troyanovsky was kind of knocked out twice, from the punch and then from the back of his head hitting the canvas. He not only scores in what was a knockout of the year contender, upset of the year, but he wins a title, and now he's got that bargaining chip. So wherever he goes from here, he's going to make money, even if it's a one and done, even if he fights somebody one time and loses that title, and which we've seen before in these sort of upset wins, coming with, just a home run punch. Good for him. He swung, he went for it, he connected, he scored the upset of the year, I believe, and now he'll get a good payday next year in his next fight. This is what it's all about, guys. This is why they fight the fights. I think this one is unanimous. You got to go with Joe Smith Jr. His KO over Andres Fonfara in the first round back on June 18th in Chicago. Again, he went to the Lion's Den. Chicago has a big Polish fan base. Fonfara, that was his house. and Smith went over there and knocked the guy out. That was an upset of the year candidate. That was a knockout of the year candidate. Wins that fight, and that punches his ticket to get the fight with Bernard Hopkins just a few weeks ago here in December in LA. And he scores another mild upset because a lot of people favored Hopkins to win that fight. Another knockout of the year candidate by not only knocking Hopkins out, being the only guy to officially knock him out, but knocking him out of the ring. It was an impressive performance. Prior to that, he had only fought in and around New York. He's from Long Island, New York. He's a construction worker there. He had only fought around there. Now he's fighting in Chicago, Los Angeles, and you got to figure he's set up for big things in 2017. You got to take him seriously as a top 10 contender at light heavyweight. No matter what, he'll always have that knockout win over Bernard Hopkins. This guy went from obscurity to headlining on HBO. If he gets a fight with Sean Monaghan in New York next year, that will definitely be on HBO Boxing After Dark, probably a headliner. It'll probably do a big crowd over there. Joe Smith Jr., 2016 Breakthrough Fighter of the Year. So this is one of my favorites. This is one that I think more boxing writers should do. Unfortunately, this year we had several contenders. I mean, you take a guy like Lamont Peterson, whose last fight was in October 2015. Peter Quillen, his last fight was that KO loss to Danny Jacobs in December of 2015. Several Al Haymon guys. I mean, there's definitely a pattern here that didn't fight at all in 2016. But I think the one for me that really stands out is Omar Figueroa. Remember him? Omar Figueroa last fought December 2015. And he got a couple of maybe gift decisions there. He came in a little overweight for a couple of fights. But this is a guy who has an undefeated record, at least on the books, 26-0 with one draw. And he was a draw in his native Texas. He did several fights there in Texas and put on big crowds. He had some exciting Fight of the Year contenders on both Showtime and HBO. He fought out here at StubHub before in front of big crowds. This guy had a following. He had a real following, which, you know, for American fighters doesn't always exist right now in boxing. And for him to not fight at all in 2016, I don't get it. Because they can put him on against almost anybody down there in Texas, and they're going to do at least 10,000 and a decent TV rating, at least in that market. So I don't get it. Either there's something going on in camp, there's nagging injuries, a combination of all that, problems with management. I don't know. But Omar Figueroa, he's definitely on the milk carton in 2016. Unfortunately, this is one we have every year in boxing as well. But you know what? It's in all martial arts. MMA, boxing, kickboxing, wrestling. And it's really in any sport that's determined, where the winner is determined by judges. I mean, man, figure skating, gymnastics, half of the Olympic sports, there are robberies and bad decisions. So this isn't just limited to boxing, okay? But for me, the worst decision this year was Kovalev-Ward. Ward winning 114, 113 on all three cards. Now, I've done plenty of videos. I've written too many articles and done too many radio spots on this damn fight. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but the reason why I feel this was the worst decision is not necessarily because of the scores, but how the scores came to be. For all three judges to give that 10th round to Andre Ward, when it was so clearly a Sergey Kovalev round, that one round where in a fight that quote unquote could go either way and was close, for all three judges to give it to Ward, for him to walk away having dug such a deep hole in the first half of that fight and giving up a couple of the championship rounds, I felt, or at least leaving them very, very close. I think it was a bad look for boxing, and it's also bad for the light heavyweight division because it holds things up. The rematch clause that is contractually obligated, there's no guarantees Andre Ward's going to keep his word and honor that contract. He's walked away from contracts before. He has no problem dishonoring a contract that he signed. In fact, he'll sit on his butt for the better part of 3 years to not go through with a contract. So he's talking about possibly retiring. I think and hope that that's just negotiating, chess playing. But either way, the light heavyweight division is being held hostage right now. And it's bad enough that Adonis Stevenson won one fight over a completely shot Chad Dawson to get his title and has milked that for years and been a complete non-factor. But you had a guy in Sergey Kovalev who was fighting often, making concessions, traveling, fighting on the road, doing what he had to do to get fights done and collecting all the titles and building something up. And that momentum has just been smashed. And now, because of the political situation between Ward's management at Rock Nation and the other parties in the division that are either controlled by Al Heyman or other promoters that Rock Nation isn't very friendly with, and then there's network situations, it's just really rough. And right now, that division's held hostage, and the pound for pound top level of the sport is kind of being held hostage. American boxing is kind of being held hostage until that rematch happens. There was such an impact from that poor decision. It's possibly going to affect the sport all year in 2017, because it wouldn't surprise me if there were injuries, if there were negotiation tactics and stalls and delays, and we don't see Kovalev and Ward fight again till the end of 2017. That might sit idle all year. Very possible. Nothing would surprise me. So that bad decision, even though it was only by 1 point, sometimes a bad decision is by 8 points, sometimes it's 1 point. But that bad decision and how the scorecards got to be, if you just look at the way the judges scored, 2 of them had 6 rounds in a row for Ward, 1 of them had 7 rounds in a row for Ward. That shouldn't happen in a quote-unquote close fight that could go either way, especially when it goes to the house fighter who is down in the fight and whose face was badly beat up. Just a bad look for boxing and a bad decision that's going to affect business for at least the next year and hold the division hostage. For me, I've been so fortunate to have been ringside for the fight of the year the last few years, to have been around some of the best fighters in the sport and to be there ringside when they fight. I've been on different shows and different platforms where I've been able to get more and more experience. But for me, just working with Boxing Monthly has been the best experience of 2016 for me. All the work I do with Boxing Monthly's website, where all my videos are up, and now I have my own page up there. The series I do for Boxing Monthly, The Neutral Corner, continues to grow. Being published in the magazine a couple times this year, getting Tiffany's photos published in the magazine, being mentioned several times in features of the magazine, like The Big Question and things like that. Just working with those guys has been awesome. They're all great people. Very helpful. Mark Butcher, a quick shout out to him for believing in myself and in Tiffany Lamb and bringing us on board. Thank you for all your counsel and advice. We really want to get over there for a fight in 2017. That's on the bucket list. It's just going to come down to money and time if we can schedule it, because it's such a big flight. It's not, because hell, LA to New York is a big trip for us. That's almost 3,000 miles, and that's just in our own country. So going from LA all the way to the UK, that's really hard. But we want to get over there. We're trying to get over there for the Joshua Klitschko fight. If we can't make it for that one, we're going to try later in the year for another one. But we absolutely want to get over there and meet everybody at Boxing Monthly and all of the boxing fans that we've gotten to know and love over there on Twitter, on YouTube, all of it. So yeah, man, working with Boxing Monthly, easily for me, the best thing for me in 2016. Every year in boxing, we have great knockouts. That's why fighters fight the fights. And I've talked about a couple of contenders for this category earlier in this video. Hassam Nadam just scored a knockout of the year candidate, I think, a week or so ago over in France. If you haven't seen that, find it on YouTube. But for me, the biggest, most crushing knockout of the year is when Murat Gassiev scored a knockout in the first round against Jordan Shamel. And it was actually on a PBC card. I think Shamel was a PBC guy, and this was a title eliminator. And Gassiev just kind of stalked in the first round and waited for that shot. And when he unleashed it, boom. boom, it was just fireworks. It was just like a bomb went off. To see a guy completely crumble like that. Sometimes on a big knockout, you see a fighter fall backwards, but when a guy either falls forwards or straight down, when you see a guy just crumble like that, almost like an accordion folding up, man, it's devastating. And Gassiev, that one punch literally punched his ticket to a title fight against Denis Lebedev, which he ended up winning later in the year. So for me, this was the knockout of the year. It was close though, man. There were several good ones. That Hassam Nadam knockout, if you haven't seen that one, check it out. That is right up there with it. But just the sound when Gassiev landed that shot on Shamel, it was just crushing. It was devastating. I don't think we're ever going to hear from Jordan Shamel again after that. It was, and he's actually admitted during interviews and stuff that it still bothers him seeing it and thinking about that knockout. So just devastating, man. If you haven't seen that, check it out. For me, this one's clear. It was also one of my favorite experiences of 2016. So it was definitely a contender for that round as well, for my year-end awards. But Francisco Vargas, majority draw with Orlando Salido back in June 4th at the StubHub Center. I actually had family in town that had never been to a fight, and I took them to that fight. We had a crew of maybe 10 of us, I think it was, family and friends there. It was a great, great atmosphere, a very passionate crowd there at the StubHub Center. Orlando Salido has really built himself up as a name with diehard fight fans here in Southern California. And Francisco Vargas has now been in 2 straight fights of the year. 2 of the judges had this 114-114, but Jerry Cantu scored at 115-113 for Vargas. I thought that was the right score. I thought Francisco Vargas clearly won this fight. It was very close, but I thought he deserved the win. I thought he was slightly a little robbed, but no man really lost here. Again, 2016 fight of the year. Both guys earned it, deserved it, and I would love to see a rematch. Part of what made this night so special wasn't just that my family and friends were there. It was the first major card after the death of Muhammad Ali. And they did a tribute there, and just to see all the fans being so respectful and honoring the legend that was Ali, at least the fighter he was in the ring. You might not have liked some of the things he represented in his personal life or did as a person, but what he did in the ring, no one can deny it was great. Wherever you rate him all time, he's certainly near the top on everyone's list. And the honor that the crowd showed that night for him. And there's just always a magic in the air at StubHub Center, man. So to me, that was easily the 2016 fight of the year. Several good candidates to talk about. Let's discuss Manny Pacquiao. I think you'd have to put him up there in the top 5 this year as far as Fighter of the Year honors. The wins over Timothy Bradley, which was his 3rd dominant win over Bradley, a very good fighter, and the win over Jesse Vargas. And he dropped those guys, right? Hardly lost a round in those fights. And, for years, Floyd Mayweather, some of the PBC pom-pom waivers and that section of the media that, they call the dummy graphic, were accusing Pacquiao of taking steroids and saying that he had this unbelievable, unnatural power as he moved up in weight and he was knocking guys out. The whole myth that he was knocking everybody out is just that, a myth. He wasn't. North of 140 pounds. At welterweight, he hasn't been knocking everyone out, but he still was hurting guys with his power. Well, look, Pacquiao's been enrolled in VADA testing now for a while, and he's still hurting guys. This late in his career, where he's really just going through the motions and fighting for the money, he's still dropping fighters, whether they be old veterans like Timothy Bradley who know how to fight and survive, or young guys like Jesse Vargas. So very good year, still a good elite dominant fighter, still has a pop in his punch, and when he's fighting a guy on even terms and there's good drug testing across the board and things are even, and when it comes to the promotion, he's competitive with anybody in and around that weight class. I'd love to see him against Terrence Crawford next year. Crawford is another fighter of the year contender in my opinion. Had a very good, underrated 2016. Fought 3 times. How many elite level fighters fought 3 times this year. I can't name many. Crawford had that KO over Hank Lundy. He had a KO over a completely shot John Molina, but still a dominant win. But that win over Victor Postal, look, it wasn't a pretty win, but it was very dominant, and he unified titles in that fight and fought a guy that was seen as the second best in the division. So, a number 1 versus number 2 fight that you dominate, that says a lot. I think Terrence Crawford absolutely had a very good year. Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, he only fought twice this year, but look at who he fought, man. At 112, he fought McWilliams Arroyo, who, if you don't know a lot about him, very good fighter, even going back to the amateurs for Puerto Rico. Very good, underappreciated fighter who should have had a title coming into that fight. He was robbed when he went and fought over in Thailand. And then at 115 pounds, first fight there, he fights Carlos Cuadras, who I'm concerned was not doing VADA testing for that fight. Some things didn't look quite right to me. If they do a rematch in 2017, I hope there is VADA testing. But Carlos Cuadras, if you don't know about him, he was one of the best 115 pounders in the world. And for Chocolatito to go right to that guy and win the fight, I'm sorry, but Chocolatito had an outstanding 2016. Vasyl Lomachenko, same thing, man. He had the win to get a featherweight title, I think late last year, but then moves up this year and fights Roman Martinez, gets the KO, dominant KO, to grab a title at 130 pounds. And then he fights Nicholas Walters, who was seen as one of the top fighters in the lower weight classes, and dominates the guy, was on his way to knocking him out legitimately, and the Axeman quit to save himself the embarrassment of being knocked out. I think Lomachenko, you got to put up there as one of the top fighters this year. But for me, the fighter of the year this year, the unanimous choice, is Carl Frampton. He unifies titles at 122 pounds against Scott Quigg. And just like I talked about with Crawford Postal, the Frampton-Quigg fight was not very exciting, but Frampton really clearly won that fight, and unified titles there and took an undefeated fighter's O. Then he comes over here to the States, he fights Leo Santa Cruz, takes another O in his first fight at 126 and takes a title. And then what does he do? He signs on for the immediate rematch. They're going to rematch in January in Las Vegas. I think Carl Frampton had a great year, and he symbolizes the best of British boxing. And I think British boxing, just talking about some extras here, which country had the best year in boxing? I think it's the UK. The UK clearly is in a golden era right now, I would say. And I'm not exaggerating. I really do think that. I think that there's this renaissance of boxing going on there. And as far as the Queensberry rules and all the historical stuff going back, it's kind of the birthplace of boxing, at least in the Western world, right? So I think it's a wonderful thing. And they got so many prospects coming up. You have the heir apparent to the heavyweight throne over the UK. And then you have Carl Frampton having the best year in 2016, I feel. Some guys from the UK lost this year when they stepped up and took challenges, but they still stepped up and took the damn challenge. Liam Smith came to Texas to fight Canelo Alvarez. Kell Brook moved up in weight to fight Gennady Golovkin. I don't care that they lost those fights. They made fights. They took challenges. Look at the crowds and the TV ratings for those 2 fights. It matters. It really, really matters. So for all the greatness that UK boxing had this year, Carl Frampton was the best of the best. And early next year, you've got James DeGale going up against Badu Jack. It just shows you that it's more of the same. You got Anthony Joshua fighting Vladimir Klitschko. More of the same, man. Some other extras. The best division in boxing. I think that, for me, it's a tie. It's junior middleweight and cruiserweight. 2 divisions that don't normally get heralded as, strong divisions in boxing. But if you look at the prospects, if you look at some of the young guys grabbing titles, that I wouldn't call them veterans yet. You really can't. They're almost prospects with titles, junior baby contenders with titles, but there's so much talent. I talked about some of the cruiserweight fighters in this video here with Murat Gassiev, and you got guys like Alexander Usyk. Denis Lebedev is still a top guy. There are so many fighters in that division, and there are guys coming up that are going to make for good fights over the next few years. Same thing at 154. Several of those guys, like the Charlo brothers, I think Demetrius Andrade, Jared Hurd, who I talked about, those guys are eventually going to be middleweights, but I'd like to see some of them fight each other before moving up to middleweight. But those two divisions for me have the best overall talent and the best potential for great fights right there within the division if cooler heads prevail and the fights get made. Worst division in boxing right now? Hard to say, but if I had to put my name on, if I had to name one, probably super middleweight. And it's not because there isn't talent there. I just feel that the talent is very top heavy and unproven. You've got James DeGale, you've got Badu Jack, you've got Gilberto Ramirez, who mostly sat idle this year. All three of those guys. I think they only fought once in 2016. And then after that, there's not much in the division. You have some prospects. You have, Callum Smith is a good prospect. You have some guys coming up the ranks, but they haven't proven themselves yet. Maybe they will in 2017, but the three top guys I mentioned didn't do much this year. Now, we're going to get some clarity at the top because DeGale and Jack are going to fight in early 2017, and then you're going to have a clear champion in that division. If Gilberto Ramirez gets active again and fights the winner of that fight, that further solidifies that person, and then you're probably talking pound for pound list type consideration for that person. But other than that, there's just not a lot of action at 168. And, a lot of people keep calling for Gennady Golovkin to move up to 168 and fight people. Guys, there's just no one there for him to fight yet. There's way better business for him at 160. So 168, probably the weakest division in boxing. But let me know what you guys think, man. Comment. You guys know that I like to comment and debate with you. We may disagree on some things, but we agree on a hell of a lot more than we disagree on. And that's what we should always focus on, especially during this season, the holiday season. So happy holidays to you, your family. Thank you for supporting my channel. I'm very, very thankful for that. And Happy New Year, safe New Year. We'll be back in 2017 with some great stuff. We've got some good matchups to look forward to. The last extra I'd include here in all this is I really do feel 2016, again, was a down year in boxing. These things are cyclical. Everything is lining up for 2017 to be a big comeback year, a bounce back year for boxing. And we've already got some good fights set up early in the year. I just hope the important fights that need to happen do happen. And that is a Kovalev-Ward rematch. That is a Canelo-Golovkin fight. Those fights have to happen in 2017. If they don't, it'll be detrimental to the sport.